We talk in DBT about transactions. And so whenever you have an interaction with someone, there's a transaction that occurs, right? So what I say and do creates urges in you for what you want to say and do next. They're not just static things occurring, like I say something and then you say something. What I say impacts you and then changes or even creates what you have an urge to say or do back next, right? So if you received a letter in blood, what's the urge that you probably would experience? Ooh, right? Not approach, but escape probably, right? And so it's what we try to do is really let families know that this is the case. And in order for the transaction to change, somebody has to do something radically different. Because what we know in families or in interactions between people is that they have the same argument over and over and over again. It might be about a different thing each time, but it's this, we say and do the same things to one another. And so before that transaction can change, somebody has to become willing to do something different. So it's having that awareness whenever you go into an interaction with someone that there is a transaction that occurs. I don't leave unchanged from a transaction with somebody, and neither do you, okay? So when our borderline personality disorder patients send a letter in blood, right, they get invalidated, right? The ooh, I don't ever want to see you again, that you can't do that, I'm calling the police, right? So what I mean by invalidation is saying to someone you don't make sense, right? And on a personal level, it almost is like you don't matter, right? Which I'm not saying that it makes perfect sense to send somebody a letter in blood, but I think there are things that we could validate for that woman and that young woman when she was a teen and doing that. What would be the valid things about her experience of losing her friend? Okay. What do you mean by that?
She was trying to relate to the
okay. So sense of abandonment, right? Because that girl was her friend, my best friend forever. All of a sudden there isn't, so I feel abandoned. Is that valid? Yeah. What would make sense emotionally for her?
She's sad.
Of course, right? Anybody would be sad. We feel sad when we have a loss of any kind. Losing a friendship, for sure. Sadness makes a lot of sense. So what we're going to learn in a few minutes is that even in the most extreme or difficult situations, there's always something valid, right? So even though she did something really unskillful, that doesn't make a lot of sense, sending a letter in blood, right? The feelings make sense. The need for connection makes sense. The wanting to see her friend again makes sense, right? So those are things that we can validate instead of just reacting to, ooh, you sent a letter in blood. I can validate that was really hard for you. Clearly, I mean, I think that we can safely say that factually, that it was really hard for her when her friend left her for other friends. That was really hard for her, as exhibited by her letter in blood. Okay. I think in the short run, especially with the brand new patient, it's lots of validation, validating the valid. We're bringing their attention to the valid pieces of something, rather than us paying attention to the invalid pieces of something. Because if all I'm going to talk to her about is her writing a letter in blood and how awful that is, or probably was for that other person, she already knows that. She's learned that over and over and over again, that people don't know what to do with her emotions. So it's finding the valid piece and validating it over and over again. Like that must have been really hard for you. I could imagine being really sad not being connected to my friend anymore until she's feeling her primary emotion, because the desperation isn't primary. The desperation comes from her judgments of, they've left me, I have no worth and value, nobody gets me, right? So we're bringing her back to what does make sense, which is the primary emotion of sadness, and that's what she needs to deal with. That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. So this is a transactional model for emotion dysregulation. So at the very top on either side, you have the high emotional vulnerability, which is the high sensitivity, high reactivity, and slow return to baseline. I like to call that the emotional trifecta, which our patients have 1. And then the pervasive history of invalidating responses that comes from being 1 to 3% of the population who experiences emotions that intensely. What they learn is people don't know what to do with their emotions. So they live in this place of between a rock and a hard spot, right? If I express my emotions, people turn away from me. If I don't express my emotions, I'm in misery and I want to kill myself, right? So what ends up happening is we all bump into things in our life. Each thing that we bump into, each thing we experience is an event. And our entire life, in fact, is one long chain. From the moment we're conceived all the way up till this moment. If we could do that for everybody in this room, right, none of us would be scratching our heads saying, how did we all end up here today? It would make perfect sense, right, based on our chain, everything that came before it. And it's the same for these people's behavior. Everything that comes before their extreme behavior makes perfect sense in the context of their high emotional vulnerability, their histories of invalidation, right, their skill deficits, overall skill deficits, because the skills that you and I use to deal with our emotion are not the skills that are going to work for these people. They're similar, but they have to be bigger, okay? So what ends up happening is we bump into an event. And let's say that the event I'm bumping into is I'm driving down the freeway and somebody suddenly cuts me off. What do you think is the primary emotion, the one that makes the most sense when that happens? Fear. I'm in a room of therapists, so you all say fear. That's awesome. Any other room is going to say what? Anger, right? But we don't go right to anger, right? Fear is the response that's normative and adaptive. When something catches us off guard that way, of course we're startled at least, right? And if I pay attention to my startledness or my fear, I can soothe it pretty quickly. But if I have lots of judgments around that, right, which I may or may not at any given moment in time, depending on my own vulnerabilities that are going on, I can jump into anger, right? And so what happens is I spend all this time being angry and telling the other driver, you're number 1, right? And they're shaking their fist back at me or whatever. And guess what? My fear is not taken care of at all. My fear is still there. It's the problem on the chain, right? But I'm stuck in anger, which makes me feel pretty powerful, right? It's energizing. It gets my blood pumping. Being fearful, we don't like in this country, right? Being afraid is considered weak, right, and vulnerable. And we want the opposite. I think the majority of Americans would say, if you had to choose between fear and sadness or anger, what would you rather experience? I would bet money that they're going to say anger. We're much more comfortable with that, even though anger doesn't make sense at all to what just happened. So anyway, that's a story to tell to go through this transactional model. So I bumped into somebody. He cut me off on the freeway. My judgments about that: he shouldn't have done that. That's not okay. Perhaps he's a bad driver, right? So my judgments take my heightened emotional arousal, because I'm a 1 to 3%er, and make it even bigger, right? My judgments make it even bigger. And then I inaccurately express. I tell him he's number 1 instead of saying, wow, that was so scary, right? And what does he do back to me? He doesn't say, have a nice day. No, he invalidates me back in some way, right? And then that becomes part of my pervasive history of being invalidated, because I have big emotions about everything. Does that make sense? So I'm going to tell a story here. It's the Bambi story. And so we're going to pretend that we have a room full of 5-year-olds, or maybe 5 or 6 5-year-olds. And we're going to have them watch Bambi for the first time. And because we're therapists and we overanalyze everything, we're probably going to prepare them for a scary part in the movie, right? And we're going to say there's a scary part in the movie, but it's okay. Bambi's going to be okay. It's going to be okay in the end. But I just want you to know it's okay if you're scared in this one part, right? So the part comes up, the gunshot goes off, It pans, I think, to Bambi's father. The camera pans over to Bambi's father, and everyone gasps because they realize that Bambi's mother has died, right? And we have this room full of 5-year-olds who are crying. And so we all individually go over to our little 5-year-old, and we're comforting them and saying, remember, Mommy told you there was going to be a scary part. You're going to be okay. This is okay. You're good. You're good, right? So we're all doing that for about 5 minutes or so. And 4 of the 5 kids that are in there, right, are ready to watch the movie again. And one kid, our kid, of course, it's always our kid, right, is still crying uncontrollably in the room, right? What do you think you do at that point as a parent? We probably do some more validation, right? We probably say, okay, no, it's okay, really, you're good, everything's gonna be fine, right? And we do that for a few more minutes. Then what do we do?
Try to help them to refocus on, to stay present with where everybody else is. Try to get them re-engaged.
Or shame them by saying, look, everybody else is okay. Why can't you be like them, right? And for 99% of kids, that's going to work. It's helpful to them to orient them to what's socially appropriate, right? But for our kid, it just makes them cry even harder, right? Until we finally get to the point where we say, look, knock it off. You are fine. This is a movie. I already told you, right? Don't we as parents ever say knock it off? Of course we do, right? And again, for 99% of the population, it's adaptive and helpful. But for the 1 to 3%ers, that's a brick in their pervasive history of invalidation, right? It starts from there. And we don't intend to invalidate our kid. Of course we don't, right? We've got our own stuff going on in that moment. Like, they must think I'm a terrible parent. My kid can't manage this. You know, we've got all our own judgments about ourselves going on probably in that moment as well. So this is the transactional model that plays out over and over and over again for people who have high emotional sensitivity. People don't get their emotions, so they start to shut down their emotions, right? People don't get it when I'm emotional, so I'm going to shut it down, right? So they already feel an otherness, an unrelatableness, right? People don't know what to do with me when I get emotional. And what happens when we try to shove our emotions down for a period of time? It comes out in another way, doesn't it? And in kids, it usually looks like anger, right? In adults, it often looks like anger as well, okay? So that's a very maladaptive way for them to deal with what they notice to be true about themselves, which is, boy, I experience a lot of emotion, and they don't. And really, I don't see a lot of people in my life who are like me. I see many more people, 99%, 97 to 99% of people, who are not like me. So of course, it makes perfect sense that they feel isolated and that like there's something wrong with them, inherently wrong with them, right?